When Dr. Adriana Vasquez from Northfield University's graduate program called me at work and asked, "Can you explain why your reference lied about you during our interview process?" My world stopped. I trusted Melody with everything. We'd been best friends for 14 years. When I found out what she actually told them, I realized I never really knew her at all. The fluorescent lights in my cubicle were humming their usual Tuesday afternoon tune when my phone buzzed against the stack of insurance claims I'd been processing since morning. The caller ID showed a 413 area code, Massachusetts. My heart did that little skip it had been doing every time an unknown number called for the past month. I'd been waiting to hear back from 3 different graduate programs, and Northfield University was my top choice. "This is Kimberly Torres," I answered, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. "Miss Torres, this is Dr. Adriana Vasquez from Northfield University's Department of Social Work. I'm calling from the admissions committee." I straightened in my chair, nearly knocking over my coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Insurance Adjuster," a gag gift from my coworker Marcus last Christmas. My hands were suddenly sweating. The bullpen around me continued its usual Tuesday chaos. Johnette's laughter echoing from the break room, the constant ping of email notifications, the whir of the ancient copy machine that sounded like it was dying. A slow death. "Yes, hello Dr. Vasquez. Thank you for calling. Ms. Torres, I need to discuss something rather unusual that's come to our attention regarding your application." Her voice had the careful, professional tone that immediately told me this wasn't the congratulatory call I'd been hoping for. My stomach dropped somewhere around my ankles. Unusual how? There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to make you wonder if the call dropped or if someone's trying to figure out how to deliver bad news. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound around me. Marcus was discussing his weekend fishing trip with someone 2 cubicles over. The elevator dinged as someone got off on our floor. Normal office sounds that felt surreal against the backdrop of what I sensed was about to be life-changing news. "Well, Ms. Torres, last Thursday we received a call from someone claiming to be your former supervisor at Morrison & Associates Family Therapy Center." She identified herself as Melody Chen and provided what appeared to be a glowing professional reference for your application. The name hit me like cold water. Melody Chen, my best friend since sophomore year at Westfield College, the person who'd held my hair back when I got food poisoning during finals week junior year, who'd helped me move out of the apartment I'd shared with my ex-husband David when our marriage imploded 2 years ago, who'd spent countless evenings listening to me vent about how much I hated my insurance job and how desperately I wanted to get back into social work. But Melody had never worked at Morrison & Associates. She'd never worked in therapy at all. She was a marketing coordinator at Riverside Community Foundation, writing grant proposals and managing their social media accounts. She knew about my time at Morrison & Associates because I'd talked about it endlessly, but she'd never set foot in the building. And more importantly, she wasn't my supervisor there. Dr. Patricia Morrison was my supervisor. Had been for 3 years until I left to take the insurance job that was slowly killing my soul but paid enough to help me save for graduate school. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding strange and far away, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. "Could you repeat that? Your friend called pretending to be your supervisor at Morrison & Associates? She spoke very highly of you, actually. Said you were one of the most dedicated counselors she'd ever worked with, that you had a natural gift for working with at-risk youth, that you'd single-handedly developed and implemented a revolutionary teen intervention program that had reduced recidivism rates by 40%. Each word felt like a small slap. Not because the praise wasn't nice to hear, God knows I needed to hear something positive about my professional abilities after 2 years of processing insurance claims, but because it was all lies. Elaborate, detailed lies told by the person I trusted most in the world. Lies that were apparently about to destroy my chances at the one thing I'd been working toward for 2 years. I'd never developed a teen intervention program. I'd never reduced recidivism rates by any percentage. I'd worked with individual clients at Morrison & Associates, doing good work but nothing revolutionary. Nothing that would warrant the kind of glowing reference Dr. Vasquez was describing. Miss Torres, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. I'm just processing this. I was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Round me, the office continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the fact that my entire future was currently imploding. The issue is, Dr. Vasquez continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. We always verify references independently. It's standard protocol. When we called Morrison and Associates directly yesterday morning, Dr. Patricia Morrison informed us that no one named Melody Chen has ever been employed there in any capacity. My throat went dry. Of course they'd called to verify. Of course they had protocols. I'd been so focused on crafting the perfect personal statement and getting strong recommendation letters that I'd never considered someone might lie on my behalf. Why would I? Who does that? She also mentioned, Dr. Vasquez continued, that while you were a competent counselor during your time there were some concerns about your ability to handle high-stress situations and maintain appropriate professional boundaries. Specifically, she referenced an incident with a client family that resulted in a formal complaint being filed against you. The room started to spin. The incident. Of course they'd mention the incident. Of course that would come up now when everything else was falling apart. It happened 6 months before I left Morrison and Associates. The Hendricks family, Mia, their 17-year-old daughter with severe depression and anxiety, and parents who thought therapy was just an excuse for their kid to get attention and avoid responsibility. I'd been working with Mia for 4 months, making real progress. She'd started opening up about the pressure she felt at home, the constant criticism, the way her parents dismissed her feelings as teenage drama. Then her parents decided to pull her out of therapy. Just like that, no discussion, no transition plan, just a phone call saying they were done wasting money on this nonsense. I'd made the mistake of calling them back, not once, but 3 times over 2 days, trying to explain how critical it was for Mia to continue treatment, how much progress she was making, how dangerous it could be to abruptly stop therapy when someone was dealing with depression. I'd pushed too hard, used language that was probably too clinical and condescending, suggested they didn't understand their own daughter's needs. The Hendricks filed a complaint saying I'd overstepped professional boundaries by contacting them repeatedly after they'd made their decision clear. Technically, they were right. I had crossed a line. But Mia had been showing signs of self-harm, making comments about feeling hopeless. And her parents were in complete denial about the severity of her condition. Dr. Morrison and I had talked through the whole situation. She understood why I'd done what I did, but she'd made it clear that my approach had been inappropriate. No formal disciplinary action was taken. It went into my file as a coaching conversation about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, but it was there. A permanent record of my poor judgment. Miss Torres, can you help us understand what's happening here? Why would someone impersonate a reference for you? And why are there discrepancies in the information we're receiving about your work performance? My mouth felt like cotton. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out the ambient office noise. This was it. This was how my dreams died. Not because I wasn't qualified or because I didn't want it badly enough, but because my best friend had decided to help me in the most spectacularly wrong way possible. Dr. Vasquez, I said slowly, testing each word before I spoke it, I need to be completely honest with you. I had no idea that Melody, my friend, had called you. I never asked her to provide a professional reference. She's not my supervisor and never has been. I don't understand why she would do this. I see. Another pause. I could hear typing in the background, probably notes being added to my file. Notes that would follow me forever if this went badly. Miss Torres, I have to ask, did you know about the complaint that was filed against you at Morrison and Associates? Heat flooded my cheeks. This was the question I'd been dreading since I'd started the application process. The question that had kept me awake at night, wondering if I should disclose something that hadn't resulted in formal discipline but was still in my file. Yes, I knew about it. It was a difficult situation. I was working with a teenage client who I believed was at risk, and her parents decided to discontinue therapy against my recommendation. I made some poor judgment calls about how to advocate for her continued treatment. I contacted the family multiple times when I should have respected their decision and worked within proper channels instead. I paused, trying to find the right words. The complaint was filed, and Dr. Morrison and I discussed the situation thoroughly. I wasn't formally disciplined, but it was documented as a learning experience about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I take full responsibility for handling the situation poorly. Why didn't you disclose this in your application? This was the question I'd been dreading. The application asked about any formal disciplinary actions, and technically, the complaint hadn't resulted in formal discipline, but it had happened, and now it looked like I'd been trying to hide something. The complaint didn't result in any formal disciplinary action, I said carefully, knowing how weak it sounded. It was documented as a coaching conversation. The application asked about formal discipline, and I wasn't sure if this qualified, but in hindsight, I should have disclosed it anyway. I should have been more transparent about the entire situation. Ms. Torres, I appreciate your honesty now. However, this situation puts us in a very difficult position. Dr. Vasquez's voice had gotten more formal, more distant. We have what appears to be a fraudulent reference provided by someone claiming professional credentials she doesn't possess. We have an undisclosed incident from your professional history that raises questions about your judgment and ethical decision-making. And now we have concerns about your transparency and the people you associate with who might be willing to commit fraud on your behalf. Each word felt like a nail in the coffin of my future. I could see it all slipping away. The acceptance letter I'd dreamed about, the chance to get back into meaningful work, the opportunity to prove that the incident at Morrison and Associates had been a learning experience rather than a character flaw. You understand why this is concerning from our perspective. She continued, I understood. Of course I understood. From their perspective, it looked like I'd either orchestrated the fake reference myself or was involved with someone who was willing to lie on my behalf. Combined with what looked like an attempt to hide a professional misstep, I appeared to be exactly the kind of applicant they wouldn't want in a social work program. Someone with questionable judgment and loose ethical boundaries. What happens now? I asked. Though I was pretty sure I already knew. We need to put your application on hold while we conduct a more thorough review. I'll need you to provide a written statement explaining everything you've told me today, including the incident at Morrison and Associates and your relationship with Melody Chen. We'll also need to speak with Dr. Morrison directly to get a complete picture of your work there. How long will that take? I'm not sure. It could be several weeks, possibly longer depending on what we discover during our investigation. And Ms. Torres, her voice softened slightly, though it still carried the weight of bad news. I want you to know that we take these matters very seriously. If we determine that you were involved in providing false information to our admissions committee, your application will be permanently rejected and will be required to report the incident to other programs you may have applied to. The words hit like physical blows. Permanently rejected. Report to other programs. My entire future, everything I'd been working toward for 2 years, suddenly balanced on the edge of a knife because my best friend had decided to lie for me without telling me. I understand, I managed to say, surprised that my voice still worked. What do you need from me? I'll send you an email within the next hour with specific instructions for the written statement. Please have it back to us within 48 hours. Be thorough, be honest, and don't leave anything out. This is your opportunity to explain your side of the story. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its professional distance. And Ms. Torres, I'd strongly recommend that you have a conversation with your friend about what she did. This isn't just about your application anymore. What she did could have serious legal implications, both for her and potentially for you if it appears you were involved. After we hung up, I sat in my cubicle staring at my computer screen, which was still showing the insurance claim I'd been working on when my life imploded. Someone had rear-ended someone else at a Target parking lot, and they were disputing who was at fault. Such a simple problem compared to what I was now facing. Clear-cut cause and effect. Obvious solutions, definitive resolution. My phone was still in my hand, and I could see my reflection in the black screen. I looked exactly the same as I had 15 minutes ago, but everything had changed. 14 years of friendship, 2 years of careful planning and saving and preparing for graduate school, all potentially destroyed by someone who thought she was helping me. I looked around the office with new eyes. This place I'd been so desperate to escape might be where I was stuck forever. The cubicle walls that had felt like a prison might be the boundaries of my entire future. The insurance claims that had bored me to tears might be my life's work. Marcus appeared at the edge of my cubicle, holding a bag of trail mix and looking concerned. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a difficult phone call," I said, trying to sound normal. "Client giving you grief," something like that. He studied my face for a moment. Marcus had been at Riverside Insurance for 8 years, and he'd developed a sixth sense for when people were struggling. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said, "but thanks." After he left, I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to Melody's name. Her profile picture showed her laughing at something off camera, taken last month when we'd gone to the farmer's market together. She was holding a bouquet of sunflowers and looked completely carefree. Exactly like the person who'd been my closest friend for 14 years. My thumb hovered over her contact. What was I supposed to say? How do you confront someone who's potentially destroyed your future while trying to help you? I typed out a text. "We need to talk. Can you call me?" The response came back almost immediately. "At work, call you tonight." At work, where she worked as a marketing coordinator for Riverside Community Foundation. Not at Morrison and Associates Family Therapy Center, where she'd apparently told Northfield University she was my supervisor just 5 days ago. I typed back, "It's urgent. Please call as soon as you can." This time, the response took longer. "Everything okay? You're scaring me." Was everything okay? I wanted to laugh, but I was afraid if I started, I might not stop. Everything was about as far from okay as it could possibly be. "Just call me when you can," I typed back. The rest of the afternoon crawled by at a pace that made geological time seem fast. I tried to focus on insurance claims, but every few minutes I'd find myself staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. The Hendricks incident kept replaying in my mind. Had I really been that out of line? At the time, it had felt like advocacy. Now, in the context of Dr. Vasquez's phone call, it felt like evidence of poor judgment and boundary issues. Jana stopped by my desk around 3:30, her usual coffee cup in hand and a concerned expression on her face. "You feeling all right? You look like someone ran over your dog." "Just a headache," I told her. Which wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding, probably from the stress of trying to figure out how my best friend had managed to potentially destroy my future while trying to help me. "You should go home early," she said. "It's dead here anyway, and you look terrible." "I'm fine," I insisted, though I wasn't sure why. What was I going to accomplish sitting here worrying about things I couldn't control? "Seriously, Kim, take care of yourself. The insurance claims will still be here tomorrow." At 4:47 p.m., my phone finally rang. Melody's name appeared on the screen along with the photo I'd taken of her last month when we'd gone hiking at Bear Mountain. She was grinning at the camera, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, met on her hiking boots, looking exactly like the person who'd been my closest friend since we were 20 years old. I stepped outside to take the call, finding a quiet spot near the employee parking garage where I wouldn't be overheard. The afternoon air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. "Hey, what's going on?" Her voice was cheerful, normal, exactly like it always was. "Your texts made it sound like someone died." "Melody," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded given that my hands were shaking. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, okay? You're officially freaking me out now. What's wrong? Did you call Northfield University last week?" Silence. Not the thoughtful kind where someone's trying to remember something, but the absolute, dead silence that comes when someone's been caught doing something they know they shouldn't have done. "Melody." She started, then stopped. "I could Hear traffic in the background, which meant she was probably walking to her car or standing outside her office building. Kim, I can explain. And there it was. The confirmation I'd been hoping I wouldn't get. My best friend had lied to the admissions committee of my dream program, and she'd done it without telling me. What did you tell them? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. I told them you were amazing, she said quickly, the words tumbling out like she'd been practicing them. I told them you were the best counselor I'd ever worked with, that you were dedicated and caring and innovative, and that they'd be lucky to have you in their program. You told them you were my supervisor at Morrison and Associates. Another pause. Yes. You told them you worked there. Yes. You told them I developed some kind of revolutionary teen intervention program. I might have elaborated a little bit about some of the work you did there. Elaborated. Like that was a normal thing to do when providing a reference for someone's graduate school application. Why, I asked, though I was starting to suspect I knew the answer. Because I knew they'd want to talk to someone from your old job? And you said yourself that Dr. Morrison might not give you the best reference because of that situation with the teenage girl and her parents. That situation, she made it sound so casual, like it was a minor workplace disagreement instead of a professional complaint that had nearly cost me my job and was now potentially costing me my future. Melody, do you understand what you've done? I helped you, she said, and I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. I gave you the reference you deserved instead of letting some uptight supervisor ruin your chances because you cared too much about a client. You lied to them, you committed fraud. I didn't commit fraud, I stretched the truth a little. You impersonated a mental health professional. You lied about working at a therapy center. You provided false information to a university admissions committee. My voice was getting louder, and I forced myself to lower it. A couple of my coworkers were walking to their cars. And the last thing I needed was for this conversation to become office gossip. Melody, they called Morrison and Associates to verify your employment. They know you lied. This time, the silence stretched long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped. They called Morrison, she finally asked, and for the first time, she sounded worried. Yes, they called Morrison. It's called verification. It's what responsible institutions do when someone provides a reference. I was surprised by how sarcastic I sounded, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. And Dr. Morrison told them not only that you never worked there, but also about the complaint that was filed against me, the one I didn't disclose on my application. Because it wasn't formally disciplinary. Oh shit, yeah, oh shit. I leaned against the concrete wall of the parking garage, suddenly exhausted. My application is on hold pending a full investigation. They want a written statement from me explaining everything. They're considering permanently rejecting me and reporting this to other programs I've applied to. Kim, I'm so sorry. I was just trying to help, by lying. By making sure they saw how good you are at your job instead of focusing on one mistake you made 2 years ago. It wasn't your choice to make, I said, surprised by how angry I sounded. The emotion seemed to come from nowhere, flooding through me all at once. This was my application, my future, my decision about what to disclose and what not to disclose. You had no right to interfere. I know, she said quietly. I know, and I'm sorry. But Kim, you have to believe me, I was just trying to help. You've wanted this for so long, and you're so good at what you do. I couldn't stand the thought of you not getting in because of some bureaucratic bullshit. What else did you tell them? What do you mean, during the phone call? What else did you say besides that I was a good counselor? Another pause, longer this time. I might have embellished a little bit about some of the work you did there. My stomach dropped again. What kind of embellishments? I told them about that teen intervention program you helped develop. What teen intervention program? The one where you worked with at-risk kids and helped turn their lives around. Where you reduced recidivism rates by 40%. Melody. I never developed a teen intervention program. I never reduced recidivism rates by any percentage. I worked with individual clients, period. That's it. I know, but you always talked about wanting to develop programs like that, and you're so good with teenagers, so you just made it up. I made it sound like you'd already done the things you're capable of doing. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. This was worse than I'd thought. Much worse. Not only had she lied about being my supervisor, she'd invented entire work accomplishments that didn't exist. She'd created a fictional version of my professional history and presented it to a graduate admissions committee as fact. Melody, they're going to verify everything you told them, every program, every accomplishment, every detail. And when they find out that none of it was real, I know, she whispered, I know. And I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. You need to call them back. What? You need to call Dr. Vasquez back and tell her the truth. Tell her that you lied, that I had nothing to do with it, and that you made everything up because you thought you were helping me. Kim, I can't do that. If I admit to lying to a university, I could get in serious trouble. You could get in serious trouble. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Melody, I'm about to lose my chance at graduate school because of what you did. My application might be permanently rejected. They might report this to every other program I applied to. And you're worried about getting in trouble. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I don't know what I meant. I'm scared. Okay, I screwed up, and I'm scared. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Getting angry at her wasn't going to fix this. The damage was already done. The only question now was whether it could be undone, and that depended entirely on whether she was willing to make it right. Melody, if you don't call them and tell them the truth, they're going to assume I was involved. They're going to think I either asked you to lie for me or that I knew you were going to do it. Either way, my application is dead. But if I call them and admit I lied, won't that make it worse for you? It can't get much worse for me. But if they hear from you that I had nothing to do with this, that you did it without my knowledge, then maybe I still have a chance. I heard her sigh on the other end of the line. Okay, I'll call them. When? Tomorrow. I'll call them tomorrow. Today, Melody. You need to call them today. I'm at work. I can't make a call like that from work, then go home sick, or take a long lunch, or call from your car. But this needs to happen today before they make any final decisions about my application. Okay, she said quietly, I'll figure it out. And Melody, tell them everything. Don't try to minimize what you did or make it sound less serious than it was. Just tell them the complete truth. I will. After we hung up, I stood in the parking garage for a long time, watching cars drive by on the street beyond, people heading home from work, or to pick up kids from school, or to run errands. Normal people with normal problems, not people whose best friends had just blown up their lives with good intentions and spectacularly poor judgment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. You disappeared. Jeanette's looking for you. I typed back, on my way in. As I walked back toward the office building, I tried to process what had just happened. 14 years of friendship, and I'd never seen this coming. Never would have guessed that Melody was capable of something like this. But as I thought about it more, I realized maybe I should have seen it. Melody had always been the kind of person who bent rules when she thought it was for a good cause. In college, she'd written papers for friends who were struggling in classes she found easy. She'd called in sick for roommates who wanted to skip work. She'd even lied to her parents about where she was when she thought they were being overprotective. I'd always admired that about her, actually. Her willingness to go to bat for people she cared about, her creative problem-solving, her loyalty. I'd never considered that someday that loyalty might backfire spectacularly and nearly destroy the thing it was supposed to protect. The elevator ride back to the 4th floor felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, I could see Jean at her desk, probably wondering where I'd disappeared to. The insurance office looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but everything felt different now, more permanent, more like a prison. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, mechanically processing claims while my mind raced through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. What if Melody didn't call? What if she did call but made things worse? What if Dr. Vasquez had already made up her mind about my application? What if this followed me to every other program I'd applied to? By 5 p.m., I hadn't heard from either Melody or Dr. Vasquez. I drove home to my apartment in Millbrook, a decent one-bedroom in a complex that was clean and affordable but not much else, when I'd moved in after my divorce. It had felt like a fresh start, a chance to build a life I actually wanted instead of the one that had happened to me. Now it just felt like the place where my dreams came to die. It means we're not going to pursue criminal charges at this time, and we're not going to report this incident to other institutions unless we discover additional evidence that you were involved. The relief was so overwhelming I had to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. "Thank you," I whispered. However, Dr. Vasquez continued, and the word landed like a blow, "Your application is still under review. The fact that you weren't involved in the fraudulent reference doesn't resolve our concerns about your failure to disclose the complaint at Morrison and Associates." The hope flickered and died. "I understand. We'll be conducting a thorough review of your entire application, including speaking with Dr. Morrison and potentially other references from your time there. This process will take several weeks, possibly longer. I'll contact you when we've made a final decision." After she hung up, I sat in the stairwell for a long time, listening to the sounds of normal office life filtering through the walls: phones ringing, elevators dinging, the distant sound of someone's radio playing soft rock from the 80s. I wasn't going to be arrested. That was something. But my application was still in limbo. And Dr. Vasquez had made it clear that my chances weren't good. I climbed back up to the second floor and returned to my cubicle, where Marcus was waiting with a concerned expression. "Everything okay? You looked like you'd seen a ghost when you left." "Just some personal stuff," I said, settling back into my chair and opening the first claim file. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He nodded and returned to his own desk, leaving me alone with Mrs. Patterson's fender bender and my thoughts. For the next few hours, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation with Dr. Vasquez. Several weeks, possibly longer. A thorough review. Concerns about my failure to disclose the complaint, the Morrison and Associates incident that had haunted me for 2 years and was now threatening to destroy my future. I'd been 28 when it happened, fresh out of my MSW program and full of idealistic notions about changing the world one client at a time. The marriage to David was already showing cracks. But I'd thrown myself into work as a way to avoid dealing with our problems at home. Mia Hendricks had been assigned to me in February 2021. A 17-year-old junior at Millbrook High School who'd been referred by her guidance counselor after a series of panic attacks during exams. Her parents, Richard and Susan Hendricks, had reluctantly agreed to therapy but made it clear they thought it was a waste of time and money from the beginning. It was obvious that Mia's anxiety wasn't just about school. She was a perfectionist, living in a house with parents who had impossible standards and no tolerance for weakness. Every conversation revealed new layers of pressure, academic expectations, extracurricular demands, constant criticism disguised as motivation. Mia had started cutting herself that spring. Small marks on her arms that she hid under long sleeves. When I gently brought up the self-harm with her parents during a family session, they dismissed it as attention-seeking behavior and suggested that talking about it would only encourage her to do it more. That should have been my first warning that this family wasn't ready for real change. But Mia was making progress, slowly, carefully. She was learning to identify her triggers and develop healthier coping mechanisms. She'd stopped cutting. She was sleeping better. She'd even started standing up to her parents occasionally, setting small boundaries that felt revolutionary in their household. Then, in June, everything fell apart. Mia had come to our session upset about her parents' reaction to her report card. Straight A's except for 1 B+ in AP Chemistry, which they'd treated like a personal failure. They'd grounded her for the summer, canceled her plans with friends, and suggested she was getting too comfortable with mediocrity. During that session, Mia had said something that made my blood run cold. "Sometimes I think it would be easier if I just wasn't here anymore." When I'd asked her to clarify what she meant, she'd shrugged and said, "Just not here. Not dealing with this anymore." It wasn't a direct suicide threat, but it was close enough to terrify me. I'd spent the rest of the session doing a risk assessment, and while Mia denied having specific plans to hurt herself, she couldn't promise me she'd be safe. Standard protocol would have been to involve her parents in safety planning, but given their history of dismissing her mental health concerns, I'd been worried they'd minimize the risk and make things worse. Instead, I'd made the decision to extend our session and work with Mia on developing her own safety plan. We'd identified people she could call, places she could go, strategies she could use if the thoughts got worse. By the end of our extended session, she'd seemed more stable and had promised to call me if she needed support. I should have documented everything and consulted with Dr. Morrison before the next session. Instead, I'd convinced myself that Mia was safe and that involving her parents would do more harm than good. 3 days later, Susan Hendricks had called to say they were taking a break from therapy. No explanation, no discussion, just a unilateral decision that their daughter no longer needed support. That's when I'd made my first mistake. I'd called them back the same day, explaining that Mia was at a critical point in her treatment and that stopping therapy abruptly could be dangerous. Susan Hendricks had been polite but firm. They'd made their decision, and they didn't need my input. The next day, I'd called again. This time, I'd been more direct about my concerns, mentioning that Mia had been showing signs of depression and that I was worried about her safety. Richard Hendricks had taken that call, and he'd been less polite than his wife. "Are you saying we can't take care of our own daughter?" he'd demanded. "I'm saying that she's dealing with some serious mental health challenges that require professional support," I'd replied. "She's a teenager being dramatic. This is exactly the kind of enabling behavior that's made her think she can't handle normal life stress." Mr. Hendricks, with respect, depression and anxiety aren't normal life stress. They're medical conditions that respond to treatment. And with respect, Ms. Torres, you've known our daughter for 4 months. We've raised her for 17 years. That's when I'd made my second mistake. Instead of accepting their decision and following proper protocols for when parents discontinue treatment against clinical recommendations, I'd pushed harder. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to understand that Mia has been having thoughts about self-harm. If something happens to her because you refuse to continue treatment, are you threatening us? I'm trying to prevent a tragedy. What you're doing is overstepping your bounds and trying to scare us into paying for services we don't want." The third call had been my biggest mistake. I'd waited 2 days, hoping they'd reconsider, but when they didn't respond to my voicemail, I'd called again. This time, I'd lost my professional composure entirely. "I'm calling because I'm genuinely concerned about Mia's safety," I'd said. When Susan Hendricks answered, "She's been showing signs of depression and having thoughts about self-harm. As her therapist, I have an ethical obligation to make sure you understand the risks of discontinuing treatment. Ms. Torres, we've told you multiple times that we're done with therapy. We don't want you to call us again. Mrs. Hendricks, please, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to prevent your daughter from hurting herself. Our daughter is fine. She's grounded and she's dramatic, but she's fine. What's not fine is a therapist who can't respect boundaries and keeps harassing us after we've made our decision clear. I'm not harassing you. I'm advocating for my client. Your client is a minor, and we're her parents. We make decisions about her medical care, not you. Even if those decisions put her at risk, there is no risk. There's a therapist who's convinced herself she's more important than she is, and parents who are tired of being manipulated." That's when I'd said the thing I'd regretted ever since. "If something happens to Mia because you refuse to listen to professional advice, you'll have to live with that for the rest of your lives." Susan Hendricks had hung up. An hour later, I'd gotten a call from Dr. Morrison asking me to come to her office immediately. The Hendricks had filed a formal complaint, accusing me of harassment, boundary violations, and attempting to manipulate them through fear tactics. They documented all 3 phone calls, including my final comment about having to live with it if something happened to Mia. Dr. Morrison had been sympathetic but clear. I'd violated multiple professional boundaries, even with the best intentions. Even with legitimate concerns about client safety, I'd handled the situation completely inappropriately. You should have consulted with me before making those calls, she'd said. You should have documented your concerns and followed our protocols for when parents discontinue treatment against clinical recommendations. You definitely shouldn't have made that comment about them having to live with the consequences. But what if something happens to her? I'd asked. Then you'll have done everything you could within appropriate professional boundaries. Kim, I understand why you did what you did, but good intentions don't excuse poor judgment. The complaint had gone into my file as a coaching conversation about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, no formal discipline, no written reprimand, but a permanent record of my poor judgment. In Mia, I'd never found out what happened to her. Client confidentiality meant I couldn't follow up, and the Hendricks had made it clear they wanted no further contact with me or Morrison and Associates for months afterward. I'd checked the local news obsessively, terrified I'd see a story about a teenage suicide that I could have prevented. I'd never found anything, which I'd hoped meant Mia was okay, but I'd never known for sure. The whole experience had shaken my confidence so badly that I'd started second-guessing every clinical decision. By the time David and I divorced 8 months later, I'd been struggling with anxiety and depression myself, wondering if I was cut out for clinical work at all. That's when I'd taken the job at Riverside Insurance. Stable income, clear procedures. No life or death decisions. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet and figured out my next steps. 2 years later, I was still here, processing insurance claims and dreaming about getting back to meaningful work. You're doing that thing again, Marcus said, appearing at my cubicle with a bag of pretzels. What thing? That staring into space thing you've been doing all morning. It's like you're here but not here. I looked at my computer screen, where Mrs. Patterson's claim file was still open, untouched for the past hour. Sorry, just thinking about some stuff. Personal stuff or work stuff. Personal. Want to grab lunch? Sometimes it helps to talk things through. Marcus had been my closest friend at Riverside, the person who'd helped me navigate office politics and kept me sane during the worst days. He was good people, divorced dad with joint custody of twin 8-year-olds, weekend soccer coach. The kind of guy who remembered everyone's birthdays and always brought extra coffee for the break room. But I wasn't ready to explain what was happening with my graduate school application. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Thanks, but I think I need some quiet time to sort through things. Okay, but the offer stands. And Kim, whatever it is, it'll work out. It always does. If only it were that simple. I spent my lunch break walking around the office park, trying to clear my head and figure out what came next. Assuming Northfield rejected my application, which seemed likely given Dr. Vasquez's tone, I'd need to decide whether to reapply next year or give up on graduate school entirely. Reapplying would mean going through the whole process again, but this time with a rejection on my record and the Morrison and Associates incident fully disclosed. It would mean another year at Riverside Insurance, another year of feeling like I was wasting my life processing claims instead of helping people. Giving up would mean accepting that my insurance job was my career, not just a temporary detour. It would mean letting go of the dream I'd been working toward for 2 years and finding a way to be satisfied with the life I had instead of the life I wanted. Neither option felt acceptable. My phone buzzed with a text from Melody. "How are you doing? I've been thinking about you all day." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, still processing everything. "Can we talk tonight? I know you're angry with me, but I want to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You lied to a university admissions committee. You made up accomplishments that don't exist. You potentially destroyed my future because you thought you knew better than I did about my own life. I was trying to help by committing fraud. I was trying to make sure they saw how good you are instead of focusing on one mistake." I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "We can talk. But not tonight. I need time to figure out how I feel about all of this." "Okay. But Kim, I really am sorry. I never meant for things to go this way." That was the problem. She'd never meant for things to go this way, but she'd never considered how they might go before she acted. She'd seen a problem and decided to solve it without thinking through the consequences or asking. If I wanted her help, it was classic. Melody, well-intentioned, impulsive, convinced she knew what was best for everyone around her. The afternoon dragged by slowly. I processed Mrs. Patterson's claim, reviewed the Henderson Street accident reports, and worked through half the backlog from last week's system outage. Normal work that required just enough concentration to keep me from spiraling into worst-case scenarios about my future. At 4:30, Jana stopped by my cubicle with a stack of new files and a concerned expression. "You seem off today," she said, settling the files on my desk. "Everything okay at home?" Jana had been my supervisor for 2 years, and while we weren't close friends, she'd always been supportive and fair. She was in her 50s, divorced with grown kids, and had the kind of practical wisdom that came from surviving decades of workplace drama and personal crises. "Just some personal stuff I'm working through," I said. "Anything I can help with?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Jana had gone back to school in her 40s to get her bachelor's degree while working full-time and raising 2 teenagers. She might understand the dream of starting over, the frustration of feeling stuck in a job that paid the bills but didn't feed your soul. But explaining would mean admitting that I'd been planning to leave Riverside Insurance, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Especially not when it looked like I might be staying indefinitely. "Thanks. But it's something I need to figure out on my own." "Okay, but Kim, don't let whatever it is consume you. I've seen too many good people make themselves miserable by dwelling on things they can't control." After she left, I thought about her advice. Don't let whatever it is consume you. Easier said than done when whatever it is was the potential destruction of everything you'd been working toward. But maybe she had a point. Maybe I was so focused on what might happen that I wasn't thinking clearly about what I could actually control. I couldn't control Northfield's decision about my application. I couldn't undo Melody's lies or the Morrison and Associates incident. I couldn't change the fact that my life had been turned upside down by someone else's poor judgment, but I could control how I responded to all of this. I could decide whether to let this setback define me or use it as motivation to find another path forward. By the time I left work at 5:30, I'd made a decision. Whatever happened with Northfield, I wasn't giving up on my goal of getting back into social work. If this application didn't work out, I'd apply 2 different programs next year. If I had to disclose the Morrison incident, I'd frame it as a learning experience that had made me a better clinician. And I'd do it without Melody's help. The drive home took me past the Barnes and Noble where Melody and I had spent so many Saturday afternoons studying and planning for my future. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel a pang of nostalgia when I saw it. Instead, I felt something that might have been relief. Whatever happened next, at least I'd know it was really mine. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Dr. Vasquez again. 3 weeks of processing insurance claims while my phone sat silent. 3 weeks of avoiding Melody's increasingly desperate texts. 3 weeks of pretending to my coworkers that everything was normal while my entire future hung in the balance. I'd almost convinced myself that no news was good news when my phone rang on a Thursday morning at 10:15 a.m. Same area code, same number that had changed my life a month ago. "This is Kimberly Torres. Miss Torres, this is Dr. Vasquez from Northfield University. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I was already standing, already walking toward the stairwell for privacy. "Yes, of course. I'm calling to let you know that we've completed our review of your application." I sat down hard on the concrete steps, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "Okay." After speaking with Dr. Morrison and conducting a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding Ms. Chen's fraudulent reference, we've made our decision. The pause felt endless. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out everything else. "Miss Torres, we've decided to accept your application to our Master of Social Work program." For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd said. The words seemed to float in the air without meaning, like a foreign language I almost but didn't quite understand. "I'm sorry, what? You've been accepted. Congratulations." I started crying right there in the stairwell of Riverside Insurance. Surrounded by motivational posters about customer service excellence, I broke down completely. "Miss Torres, are you there?" "Yes," I managed to say through the tears. "I'm here. I can't believe it. I want to be clear about something," Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice gentler than it had been in our previous conversations. "Your acceptance has nothing to do with Ms. Chen's fraudulent reference. In fact, if we'd based our decision on what she told us, you probably wouldn't have been accepted." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, trying to pull myself together. "What do you mean?" "Because when we looked at your actual record, your real work at Morrison and Associates, your honest personal statement, your genuine recommendations, we saw someone with the potential to be an excellent social worker." Dr. Morrison spoke very highly of your clinical skills and your commitment to your clients. She also spoke about the incident with the Hendricks family. I felt my stomach clench. "What did she say?" "She said it was a learning experience that made you a better clinician. She said you'd been devastated by the complaint and had spent months reflecting on how to handle similar situations more appropriately. She said she'd trust you with her own family." More tears. "She said that, she did. Ms. Torres, the incident at Morrison and Associates doesn't disqualify you from our program. If anything, it shows that you care deeply about your clients and that you're capable of learning from your mistakes. Those are exactly the qualities we want in our students. But I didn't disclose it on my application." "No, you didn't, and that was a mistake, but it wasn't a character flaw, and it wasn't fraud. It was a judgment error made by someone who was afraid that one difficult situation would define her entire career." I sat in that stairwell for another 10 minutes after we hung up, staring at my phone and trying to absorb what had just happened. Accepted to my dream program, despite everything. When I finally made it back to my cubicle, Marcus took one look at my face and grinned. "Good news, I take it, the best news. Want to tell me about it?" I looked around the office, at the stacks of claims, the flickering fluorescent lights, the motivational posters that had never motivated anyone, at the cubicle walls that had felt like a prison for 2 years. "I got into graduate school," I said. "I'm going back to social work." Marcus whooped loud enough that Jana came over to see what was happening. When I told her, she pulled me into a hug that smelled like coffee and vanilla perfume. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "And I'm going to miss you terribly." That afternoon, I finally responded to one of Melody's texts. "Can we meet for coffee? I have something to tell you." She responded immediately, "Yes, where and when?" "Brewster's, 6 p.m. Brewster's was the coffee shop where we'd spent countless hours over the past 2 years, where she'd helped me study for the GUR and listen to me complain about my job. It felt like the right place for this conversation. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual table by the window, looking nervous and hopeful and guilty all at once. She'd lost weight, I noticed. There were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Kim," she said, standing up as I approached, "thank you for coming." I sat down across from her, the same seat I'd occupied hundreds of times before, but everything felt different now. "I got in," I said without preamble. Her face lit up. "Really? Oh my God, Kim, that's amazing." "I knew they'd know," I interrupted. "You don't get to be excited about this." The joy on her face crumpled. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your lies almost cost me everything. Dr. Vasquez told me that if they'd based their decision on what you said, I probably wouldn't have been accepted because it was so obviously fabricated." Melody's face went white. "But you got in anyway." "I got in despite what you did, not because of it. I got in because of my real work, my real experience, my real qualifications, the things you apparently didn't think were good enough." That's exactly what it was," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "You looked at my actual accomplishments and decided they weren't impressive enough. So you made up better ones. I was trying to help. You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. And in the process, you almost broke everything." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the coffee shop buzzed with normal evening activity, students studying, couples on dates, friends catching up, normal people with normal problems. I'm sorry, Melody said finally. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I know you are, and I know you thought you were helping. But Melody, what you did showed me that you don't really know me at all. What do you mean? You've been my best friend for 14 years, and you thought I was the kind of person who would be okay with fraud. You thought I was the kind of person who would want to get into graduate school based on lies. I never thought of it as fraud. What did you think of it as? She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup like it might have answers. I thought of it as leveling the playing field, she said finally. I thought you deserved to get in, and I was afraid one mistake from 2 years ago would keep that from happening. But it wasn't your decision to make, I know, and it wasn't one mistake. It was a learning experience that made me a better clinician. Dr. Morrison told them that. Melody looked up, surprised. She did. The thing you were so afraid would hurt my chances actually helped them understand who I am as a professional. But I never would have learned that if you hadn't forced the issue by lying. I didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a problem and decided to solve it without talking to me first, just like you always do. What do you mean? I thought about all the times over the years when Melody had helped me without asking, writing papers for me in college when I was struggling, calling my boss when I had the flu to make up elaborate stories about why I couldn't come in, setting me up on dates with guys she thought would be good for me without checking if I was interested. I'd always appreciated her willingness to go to bat for me, but I'd never realized how controlling it was, how it suggested she didn't trust me to handle my own life. I mean that you have a pattern of deciding what's best for other people and then acting on those decisions without their input. You think you're being helpful. But what you're actually doing is telling people that you don't trust their judgment. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time I asked you to solve a problem for me versus you just deciding to solve it? She was quiet again. Melody, I love you. You've been my best friend for 14 years, and that means something. But I can't have someone in my life who thinks they know better than I do about what I need, or you ending our friendship. I'd been dreading this question since the moment Dr. Vasquez first called me 3 weeks ago. Part of me wanted to say yes, to make a clean break and start fresh without the complication of a relationship built on patterns that no longer worked. But 14 years of friendship didn't disappear just because someone made a terrible mistake. And despite everything, I knew Melody's heart had been in the right place. Even if her actions had been completely wrong. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to figure out how I feel about all of this. And if we're going to stay friends, things have to change. What do you mean? I mean that you have to stop trying to fix my life. I mean that you have to ask before you help. I mean that you have to trust me to make my own decisions and live with the consequences. I can do that. Can you? Because this isn't the first time you've overstepped. It's just the first time the consequences were this serious. She nodded. Slowly. You're right. I know you're right. I've been thinking about it ever since this happened, and you're right. Melody, I'm going to graduate school in Massachusetts. I'm going to be building a new life there, and I need to know that when I tell you about my challenges and my struggles, you're not going to try to solve them for me. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to really understand. I need you to understand that what you did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal of everything I thought our friendship was based on. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. I know, and I hate that I did that to you. I hate that I made everything worse when I was trying to make it better. I reached across the table and took her hand. I know you do, and I know you were trying to help. But Melody, good intentions don't excuse bad actions. You taught me that the hard way. We talked for another hour, working through 14 years of friendship and trying to figure out if there was a way forward. By the time we left Brewster's, we hadn't resolved everything, but we'd started to rebuild something that looked different from what we'd had before. Something based on respect instead of rescue. Something that acknowledged that sometimes the best way to help someone is to trust them to help themselves. 2 months later, I gave my notice at Riverside Insurance. Marcus threw me a going-away party that involved too much cake and too many speeches about how much I'd be missed. Johnny gave me a card that said some people dream of success. Others work for it, and told me she'd never doubted I'd find my way back to meaningful work. I sold most of my furniture, packed my life into a moving truck, and drove to Massachusetts to start over, again. The campus at Northfield University was everything I'd imagined: ivy-covered buildings, tree-lined paths, students hurrying between classes with the kind of purposeful energy that comes from pursuing something that matters. My first day of classes, I sat in a lecture hall listening to a professor talk about ethical decision-making in clinical practice, and I thought about Mia Hendricks. About the phone calls I'd made and the boundaries I'd crossed, about the complaint that had nearly derailed my career before it really started. I thought about how terrified I'd been that one mistake would define me forever, and how that fear had almost kept me from pursuing the thing I wanted most. But I also thought about what Dr. Morrison had told the admissions committee, that the incident had made me a better clinician, that she'd trust me with her own family. Maybe that was the real lesson, not that mistakes don't matter, but that what matters more is what you do with them. How you learn from them, how you let them shape you into someone stronger and wiser and more compassionate. During our third week of classes, we had a guest speaker, a social worker who'd been practicing for 20 years and had built a program for at-risk youth that actually was reducing recidivism rates by 40%. She talked about the mistakes she'd made early in her career, the clients she'd failed, the times she'd overstepped boundaries or underestimated risks. She talked about how those experiences had taught her to be more thoughtful, more collaborative, more humble. The difference between a good social worker and a great one, she said, isn't that the great one never makes mistakes, it's that the great one learns from every mistake and uses that learning to serve their clients better. After her presentation, I raised my hand. What advice would you give to someone who's starting over after making a significant professional mistake? She smiled. I'd tell them that starting over is a gift. It's a chance to build a career based on who you are now, not who you were when you didn't know better. And I'd tell them that the clients who matter most are often the ones who benefit from working with someone who's been humbled by their own mistakes. That night, I called Melody. We'd been texting regularly since I'd moved to Massachusetts, carefully rebuilding our friendship with new boundaries and better communication. How's school? She asked. Hard, scary, amazing, tell me about it. So I did. I told her about my classes and my professors and my classmates. I told her about the guest speaker and the question I'd ask. I told her about how it felt to be pursuing something that mattered again, and for the first time in months. I didn't worry that she'd try to fix anything or solve any problems I mentioned. I just enjoyed having someone who cared about me listen to me figure out my own life. I'm proud of you, she said when I was done. Thank you, and Kim. I'm sorry it took almost losing our friendship for me to learn how to be a better friend. I'm not, I said, surprising myself. I think we both needed to learn some things. I needed to learn to trust my own judgment more. You needed to learn to trust mine too. Have you heard anything about Mia? She asked quietly. The girl from Morrison and Associates. I'd wondered the same thing myself. No. And I probably never will, but I hope she's okay. I hope she found someone who could help her in ways I couldn't. Do you think you'll ever stop feeling guilty about that? I thought about it. I don't think I want to stop feeling guilty about it. But I think I'm learning to let the guilt teach me instead of paralyze me. 6 months into the program, I started my field placement at a community mental health center that specialized in working with adolescents. My supervisor was a woman named Dr. Rachel Kim who'd been practicing for 15 years and had a reputation for being both brilliant and demanding. During our first supervision meeting, she asked me about my professional background. I told her about Morrison and Associates, about Mia Hendricks, about the complaint and the phone calls and the boundaries I'd crossed. She listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. How do you think that experience will inform your work here? She asked when I was done. I think it taught me the importance of consultation and collaboration. I think it taught me that good intentions aren't enough if you don't have good judgment to back them up. What else? I think it taught me that sometimes the best way to help someone is to work within systems instead of trying to work around them. And I think it taught me that my job isn't to save people, it's to give them tools to save themselves. Dr. Kim smiled. That sounds like someone who's ready to do this work. 3 weeks into my placement, I was assigned a new client, 16 years old, struggling with anxiety and depression. Parents who were skeptical about therapy but willing to try. The first time I met Sarah Martinez, she reminded me so much of Mia Hendricks that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to collect myself before we could start the session. But when I sat back down across from her, I didn't see someone I needed to save. I saw someone I could help learn to save herself. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The program was everything I'd hoped it would be: challenging, meaningful, focused on turning passion into practice. I threw myself into my studies with the intensity of someone who'd almost lost the chance to be there. But I also tried to remember the lessons I'd learned about balance and boundaries. I asked for help when I needed it. I consulted with supervisors. Before making difficult decisions, I trusted the process instead of trying to control every outcome. During my second year, I developed a research project examining the impact of family dynamics on adolescent mental health outcomes. It wasn't revolutionary, it wasn't going to reduce recidivism by 40% or change the field overnight, but it was mine, based on my real experiences, my actual insights, my genuine passion for understanding how to better serve young people and their families. When I presented my findings at the Student Research Symposium, Dr. Vasquez was in the audience. Afterward, she came up to congratulate me. "You know," she said, "when I first called you about Ms. Chen's fraudulent reference, I wasn't sure you'd make it through our program." "Why not?" "Because I thought you might be someone who needed external validation to succeed. But watching your presentation today, it's clear that your success comes from something much more reliable than that." "What's that?" "Your own commitment to the work, your willingness to learn from difficult experiences, your understanding that being a good social worker isn't about being perfect, it's about being real." As I walked across the stage at graduation, I thought about all the people who'd helped me get there. Dr. Morrison, who'd seen potential in me even after I'd made a significant mistake. Marcus and Jana, who'd supported me even when they didn't fully understand my dreams. Dr. Kim, who'd trusted me with vulnerable clients and helped me develop the skills to serve them well. And Melody, who was sitting in the audience despite everything that had happened between us, who'd learned to be a different kind of friend, who'd driven for hours to watch me graduate and celebrate this achievement that was finally, completely mine. After the ceremony, we went out for dinner at a restaurant near campus. Melody raised her glass for a toast to Kim, she said, who taught me that sometimes the best way to help someone is to get out of their way and let them succeed on their own. I raised my glass in return to friendship that survives mistakes and comes out stronger on the other side. We clinked glasses, and I realized that this moment, this achievement, this new beginning was exactly what I'd been working toward all along. Not just the degree or the career change, but the knowledge that I could trust myself to build the life I wanted, that I could learn from my mistakes without being defined by them, that I could accept help without giving up my agency, that I could be exactly who I was, flawed, learning, growing, and that would be enough. The next week, I started my first job as a licensed social worker at a community mental health center in Springfield, Massachusetts, on my first day. My supervisor handed me a case file for a 17-year-old client who'd been struggling with depression and anxiety. I opened the file, read through the intake notes, and felt that familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that came with the opportunity to help someone find their way through a difficult time. But this time, the nervousness wasn't about whether I was good enough or qualified enough or experienced enough. It was the good kind of nervousness, the kind that comes from knowing you're about to do work that matters, with skills you've earned, in a way that honors both your clients and yourself. I thought about Mia Hendricks one more time, about the phone calls I'd made and the boundaries I'd crossed, about the complaint that had almost ended my career before it started. And I thought about how grateful I was that it hadn't ended there. How grateful I was for second chances and hard-learned lessons and the opportunity to serve others from a place of wisdom instead of just good intentions. Then I picked up the phone to call my new client's family and schedule our first session. This time, I was ready.